2013 in partnership in CNBC TV 18. It's really very heartening to see that successful completion of 10 years of this journey. And over the years, this platform has evolved into a cross-country benchmark when it comes to recognizing the efforts of the Risk India Incorporated's risk managers like you all. The traditional risks were mainly physical in nature, and their impact was localized, maybe a factory or a warehouse and things like that. But now with new age, this thing coming in, the risks have also got complex, very difficult to manage, and their impact is so bigger, wider, and so widespread, and even faster. We had heard about pandemics in such conferences few years back. None of us envisaged that we will be hit by a pandemic and eventually be badly impacted because of this. Now we have experienced it, have seen that how we have come forward and come out of it. The new age risks. Look at the temperature, the climate change, the erratic rainfalls that are happening. All of us have seen erratic rainfalls happening in the country. Be it the inclement weather that happened somewhere a few weeks back in US, minus 25 degrees or lower than that. The recent floods in New Zealand. All of this has impacted the supply chains, or it's a major risk nowadays for business as well as the personal lives. Look at inflation. So Western countries could have never thought that their inflation levels would reach close to about 5% or more kind of. They have never seen such inflation levels. Obviously, those economies will get contracted, and the spillover impact may be, experienced by so many other countries of the world. Thankfully, we are a domestic consumption economy. We may not get impacted, but there are risks for us. Our companies which are export-oriented or major part of the business, comes from exporting to Western countries may do get impacted if in case this contraction of economies lasts for some years. India is among the fastest growing economies of the world as of now. And thankfully, the manufacturing is completely aided by the government as of now in terms of so many other policies, whether Make it India or PLI schemes and things like that. India seems to be in a sweet spot when it comes to, giving a contribution to the global production manufacturing space or the supply chains. Globalization was something which was very strongly prevailing. A lot of free movement of goods, services, capital, people was happening across the world, and we were becoming more and more interconnected. In fact, changes in technology, or I may say improvement in technology, improvement in means of communication, and actually resulted in over-dependence that we had among the countries of the world. In fact, it's a global village with completely connected and over-dependent on each other types. There was a time before COVID-19 when some of these trends were changing. A lot of geopolitical shifts like tariffs, revision or the revised thing on the foreign direct investments, or in fact some of the national oversensitivity towards the national security in terms of trade. This was all slowing down globalization a couple of years even before pandemic. Then the pandemic hit us, and all of us know that how it slowed down and impacted the supply chain across the world. The prolonged, the geopolitical tensions between Ukraine and Russia have highlighted the pitfalls of being over-dependent as far as the world economy is concerned. There is a very strong view which is emerging and which is also forcing the governments, even the large corporations, to invest substantially in onshoring or nearshoring or even friendshoring, and the value chain that they have, especially the US and the European countries. India is in a sweet spot, considering that India, along with some other countries like Turkey or Vietnam or Mexico, because of their proximity to markets or because of their demographics, are likely to be benefit if in case the value chain is diversified.
After COVID, what are the conversations these days? The conversations are value conservation to value creation, focusing shift from services to products, and that is why probably we are talking about manufacturing, and we have some doyens from the manufacturing sector here. Third is the localization. After COVID pandemic, people are talking about localization because some believe that global problems need small solutions and systemic thinkings. This is a food for thought for the panel here. The second C is conflict. The Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has caused the greatest humanitarian crisis that Europe has seen since World War II. And this has compounded the supply chain problems in critical sectors like agriculture, automotive, energy, and food, with many of the countries imposing self-imposed sanctions and exiting Russia. And with this, the unavailability of critical supply chain inputs has hit almost every company in the world. And the third C, which I believe is the most critical, and human life is under threat because of that, is the climate. The conversations on supply chain hover around technology, sustainability, and human development. And I will just touch upon 6 Ps, or the 6 key pillars of a resilient supply chain. Number 1, visibility. Number 2, technology investments and digitalization. Number 3, sustainability. Number 4, flexibility. Number 5, collaboration. Number 6, configuration and control by analyzing critical dependencies in supply chain. In every crisis lies an opportunity. And for the supply chain, the 3 Cs is finally resulting in some much needed rethinking. And before I end, I would just like to share with you something that somebody told me in one of my chats, an industry leader I was talking to, and he said that whenever you take a decision, recall the face of the poorest and the weakest whom you have seen, and ask yourself whether the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to that person.
Heard a lot this evening from our two eminent speakers about resilience, how to really overcome the kind of supply chain challenges that we've seen, and we've heard about the use of technology, how to build visibility, sustainability, especially that's an important aspect, flexibility, collaboration. These are all key objectives and key ingredients in building those kind of supply chains, particularly when it comes to the manufacturing space, because manufacturing has been in focus. And today, each one of our panelists will bring in a different perspective and share their experience on how, whether they've been on the advising side or whether they've been on the navigating the risks themselves, share their stories with us. Seema, let me start with you. And we've been hearing a lot from our panelists about really mitigating some of those global headwinds. So pandemic, it's been 3 years since we've come out of it. For the pharmaceutical sector, for Dr. Reddy's, what were some of the challenges that you faced, and what are the key lessons that you've learned?
In our organization and in the industry, I think one point which others also spoke about was localization. So all your critical molecules, what the organizations have done is they have looked at end-to-end visibility. So usually in pharma, it is not only the raw material, API, but you also call something as key starting material. So the end-to-end visibility of supply chain was reviewed thoroughly, and what the supply chain was doing, not only the APIs, but the key starting materials also, who is supplying them, doing a proactive supplier relationship. Actually, that was very key for us. The relationships, the strategic business conversations that we had with our business partners made supply chain work completely across the globe, supplying the COVID vaccinations, COVID medicines, and many other medicines. So for pharma, it is, and what happens for pharma, it is also, it's more humanity. The whole business is supply of medicines. So somewhere that purpose kicks in a lot.
The auto industry, and not just COVID, I mean, you have been hit by multiple shocks. The Russia-Ukraine war, I mean, the kind of supply chain shocks, we know it's been brutal for you. What's come out of that?
I think lots of lessons that have come out of this. For instance, one is risk assessment. It's a word that has not been given that much importance. How do you assess risk? It's not just about risk that you have, but across your supply chain. Second is cost. Usually you look at cost of A supplier versus B supplier. You need to look at complete 360-degree cost view, which means that what will be the cost in the short term, medium term, long term, if the disruption was to happen, the logistics, the lead time. Just-in-time inventory may not be the right thing. So that's the other aspect that comes. The third aspect I would say is collaboration and communication. I think Shantanu touched on that. And why that's very important is because, see, you can't predict pandemic and you can't prepare for pandemic. You can't prepare for Ukraine, Russia. If your supply chain, you gear up for these, it will be hugely costly supply chain. And by the time that war strikes, you would be out of the business, even before that. So I think it's a misnomer to say that we'll gear our supply chain for these kind of pandemics. I think what's important is go back to the basics. which is diversification, which is looking at cost as 360 view, which is looking at more responsiveness. That how do you get early warning signals, and how responsive your supply chains can be, which can only be if you're collaborating and communicating across your supply chain, right back to tier 3, tier 4. In fact, I would say all the way back to Mother Earth.
A lot about building in risk assessment, risk management into their systems. Indian companies haven't been great at doing that. It's been a lot of just in time. And that brings in the China factor, because China sort of bowled a googly during the pandemic, bowled another one just recently as well. And the whole world, including India, was dependent on it.
So, China plus one or minus China was not a new concept. It's been here. People have been talking about it. It's just that it wasn't given that much of seriousness till maybe COVID hit us. China minus one, China or minus China, China plus one has evolved heavily after COVID. Price margins that we were enjoying from China have also, really gone down. Plus, the other countries have opened up, right? So as a part of risk assessments that we've seen, China or rather just concentration in any country has taken a lot of emphasis when it comes to organizations thinking about it. We've heard about globalization, and now it's globalization and, inshoring, friendshoring. Mr. Bhalla spoke about it. The idea is that where do you perceive those risks? How do you stop them? When it comes to the entire supply chain and the entire value chain that you have, you've not been thinking about risks that one small supplier's stoppage can hit you.
Sandeep, let me bring you in here. One thing that perhaps the world, and we are all beginning to sort of garner and going forward from what Ramanjit said, is that we are getting used to the fact that we don't know when the next meteor or asteroid is what we're talking about now, that has been identified by NASA, for instance. We don't know where the next bomb is going to explode. I'm talking about in terms of the supply chain risks. So building resilience, I mean, how do you address it? It's almost verging on becoming, reading the tea leaves and trying to foresee what's going to happen next. How do you sort of build resilience in this kind of a complex and uncertain world?
Resilience, as a concept, of course, has been a very critical, part of the risk manager function over the years. And over the last 2 or 3 years, this particular concept of resilience has come in the forefront, especially, so many global events happening, Brexit taking place, geopolitical situations that, all of us are going through. But very important point is the climatic changes. Now, like any big geopolitical, situation, it is very difficult to also start predicting as to what is the next, climatic impact which is going to happen, and how is it going to disrupt, the supply chains across the globe.
Solutions, Sandeep, you think of building sort of multiple plan A, plan B, plan C. I mean, you just keep building sort of backups upon backups. Is that how you build resilience?
So I would tend to agree with what Niranjan said. So at the end of the day, it's almost impossible to actually start predicting, tomorrow what is going to hit us. What is more important is to, you need to have some kind of a framework which will keep on telling you that whether I have covered, my bases. Dipti would agree that, today, we have certain segment of clients where the risk assessment and the entire risk framework and the culture is really not present. And that's where a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of evolving the risk framework for clients, so that they are very clear as to what the organization is going to face and what are the overall risks which the organization is exposed to.
So basically, build the basics, keep those frameworks in place, and you're continuously assessing. And, let me come to you, Sushil, here, because when it comes to, for instance, we're talking about climate change. I mean, how are you as a company addressing this? Whether we are talking about climate change, whether we are talking about sanctions. I mean, you are exporting as well to certain markets, neighboring markets as well. How do you sort of build in, what's the kind of risk model that you've built?
This is an ongoing process in our kind of industry. Basically, I can't say that we did today and then we can sleep over it for some time. It's actually monitoring every day internally, I mean, in terms of the raw material supplies, which I mentioned earlier, and also externally. Because of course, we all know India has been exporter of sugar for last couple of years. So those kind of assessments have to be done, and when the buyers overseas, they want to place orders, so they also look at our kind of I would say, the management or, to some extent, the ESG practices that we all follow.
Companies are able to frame their risk parameters. Is that a very important key element that even insurance companies are considering when they look at companies and really decide in terms of premiums or even in terms of the strategies that you're offering?
Over the last, 5-7 years or maybe about 10 years or so, the role of insurer has undergone a tremendous change. Insurers typically in the past were expected to be a entity to, carry the risk or to transfer the risk from a client to an insurance industry. But, over the years, the needs of the client itself has undergone a huge change. What they are now saying is that insurers should be able to advise us. They should be able to help us in identifying. They should partner with me and tell me what are the risks which are known, which are the risks which are unknown. And the risks which are known could be transferable or it could not be transferable. Transferable risks, clearly there are various products over a period of time which have evolved. And the risks which are not transferable, again, that needs to be, as I was mentioning, and as the Niranjan also put in a framework, which is kind of there. It's there. Idea is to put in motion. And when you talk about ERM framework, it is again very easy to say, but it should not be a theoretical kind of an exercise. It needs to be something that needs to be lived through as a culture organization should go through. So once that framework is there in place, it then helps you to start having strategies to mitigate it, reduce it, and transfer it or increase or reduce it. So that is something which is key. And coming back to insurance company, clearly we have our own models in terms of evaluating, what are the good risks, what are the bad risks. But more importantly, it is important to start partnering with clients to manage the risk. So, there are various functions that, as an insurance company that we have been able to evolve. That there's a team who works very closely with client to see how can I reduce the risk itself. Raman again spoke about certain aspects of it. So in supply chain, for example, digitization is now taking place in a very big way.
Right.
Now, again, pharma SEMA is here. We have spoken about it in the past as well, that pharma companies today have on the supply chain front has a lot of these temperature, variation risks which are there. Now, can we come out with sensors? Okay, so sensors can be put into containers. Sensor itself will give you a trigger point saying that, the temperature has fallen beyond a particular level, and can I go back to the transporter and the truck driver and ensure that, it comes back to normal.
Right.
Such kind of, various solutions, depending upon the problem, insurance industry or companies like us have been able to advise client and come out with solutions which are beyond typical risk transfer solution.
So really, one has to think a little differently. I think that's what these current circumstances demand. And, we've been talking deeply a lot about collaboration as well. What do you exactly mean by collaboration, especially for Indian companies? What form and shape should that make? Because we are talking about localization at one extent, but also collaboration. And the world is also becoming a bit of a, protectionist mode, so to speak.
I think collaborations will be the key in terms of reducing those risks, because while on one stance you will be able to reduce the geopolitical risks or the risks of China being extremely volatile, what happens when you're not able to set that shop here?
I just wanted to add to what Dipti is mentioning. When you talk about collaboration, again, it's extremely critical if you look at the angle of risk management. So, various players, various stakeholders, the client himself, there is a risk function who is actually responsible for ensuring, risks are transferred adequately. There is a user group which is there, okay, say in this case, say a logistics department. They are vendors themselves. It could be transporters, okay, risk transfer company like ICICI Lombard or some other insurance company. All of these, stakeholders need to collaborate and try to address the problem which is there. And it could be, as I said, may or may not be insurable. Idea is to come out with solution which will actually reduce or eliminate the risk.
I just want to hear closing comments, and I also want to bring in the whole ESG aspect, especially the environmental aspect. And, Sushil, let me start with you, because, how do you sort of balance the business needs along with the kind of ESG requirements and at the same time, ensure that you are building and adhering to some of those points of collaboration, flexibility, scale in your supply chain?
Sugar industry is one industry which works on 100% biofuel. Okay, so we don't actually consume any fossil fuel. The entire power is generated out of the byproduct, which is generated out of crushing of the sugarcane. And there is zero emission and zero liquid discharge, I must say that.
Final word from you, and just a question on whether you think the appetite for taking calculated risks has come down a little bit.
Not really. I mean, see, at the end of the day, it's all about, we are in the business of risk. I mean, if you get, afraid by, with some of the things which are evolving, it is not something that is in our DNA. So, insurance industry typically has been on the forefront. In fact, I missed, sharing this in the past, in the starting of the panel discussion was, the role of the insurance industry, if you look at it, especially on the pandemic as well as during natural catastrophe, has been tremendous. And, when natural catastrophe happens, when, you have floods kind of situation, you have earthquake kind of situation, the industry has come out with technology tools. We have come out with virtual surveys. We have come out with this mobile app itself on the basis of which you can do real-time surveys and real-time claim settlement happens. So, continuity clearly has been something that we have always believed in, and we have in a way contributed to ensure the sustainability and the continuance of business happens.
And with that, we come to an end of this edition. This was a masterclass about mitigating risks, especially as far as supply chains are concerned in the manufacturing industry. We hope it gave you some important insights. Thank you so much for joining us for this special session.